Right, I think we are live. Got a little bit of background noise from me there. So, Joel Pearson
Yeah,
and Michael. Sorry, what? How do you pronounce your last name?
Neiman.
Michael Neiman. Okay, cool. So, I'm quite interested to find out how you got into, or how, were you ever religious at any point? Did you leave a religion? Did you start off atheist?
Essentially, grew up in sort of a culturally Jewish household, but very much reform, much more about deed than creed. So, at a very early age, we were kind of encouraged to question the Bible and look at it allegorically. So, it was never really, it's not really a huge leap in my mind for most Jews to go the agnostic route. I think most of us are agnostics by heart.
That's yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it because I have heard a lot of Jews the way they speak or people within Judaism tend to speak as if God is actually just a construct.
Yeah, the whole idea of heaven and hell was, you know, basically when I was growing up, just to be more allegorical. And um, a lot of people, I'm not religious, but my wife still goes to synagogue, are really agnostics and atheists, and they substitute the word universe or that which we can't understand for God, and they call it good.
So it's a very pantheistic approach.
Yeah, I would think so.
That's pretty interesting. So, what got you interested in working on, going to debate groups and just talking to believers? Do you have many
Yeah,
around you? I'm not sure whereabouts you live.
Massachusetts is an extremely liberal part of the country. And grew up in Boston with a Catholic, very strong Catholic archdiocese there. And then, I'm not sure if you ever saw the movie Spotlight, but that was about um,
Not seen
basically
that one there.
yeah, that was basically the uncovering of the Catholic Church scandal. So where I live, there's a great deal of skepticism about religion as an institution. A lot of people actually have left Catholicism that I know because of that scandal. Um, so I grew up in a very unreligious part of the country to begin with. So it's really no social pressures. You don't see a lot of people going to church on Sunday where I live. So it's really not a big deal. But in terms of my own personal activism, it was really the day after our election. I was always a live and let live agnostic. People just do what they want. But then with the rise of this Christian Taliban and Trump's presidency, all of a sudden I became very interested because I saw it affecting me and the people around me.
Yeah, we've had something similar with the Brexit approach. Actually, I looked at a poll recently, and even after all this information's come out, there's still about 48% showed as still wanting to leave the EU, which I would have thought that had changed much more given how much information has come to light since the
Yeah,
referendum.
you see that it's tied into British Protestantism and um, sort of you know identity with the Church of England, even if people aren't religious.
I'm not sure if it's religious. I think it might be more xenophobic and
Mm-hmm.
intellectual, just a consequence of the failure of the education system. I know that they don't invest as much money as really should be into educating the young people.
How about you, Joe? What got you interested in atheism, or more, you know, more active versus passive expression of that?
I think I pretty much went straight into anti-theism, to be honest. I've only been an atheist for about 2 years.
Yeah. Well, I think you'll see at least the Americans on our religious page. I think you'll see a similar trajectory to anti-theism than mine. It was we're really not anti-theistic to the degree that theism doesn't affect us. But then you have blue laws. They can't sell alcohol on Sunday where I live. Um, school prayer. These insidious um, elements of religion. That really is sort of a bridge too far for most of us.
Yeah, I see a lot from the Freedom from Religion Foundation and the Satanic Temple as well tend to highlight a lot of injustice that's being done, trying to break down the barriers between church and state. It's quite a
Hmm.
dangerous thing to do. I don't think they realize what it would mean to change those laws if, say, Islam became the majority religion.
Right. Exactly. I mean, they'll think this is white Christian identity politics, and they don't stop and think, well, what if we start teaching about Muhammad's teaching or Satanism or L. Ron Hubbard, in these charter schools, these publicly funded charter schools, then all of a sudden the conversation changes.
Well, to be fair, if Satanism was the dominant religion, then it would probably be pretty good.
I'm
You
sorry,
need
can
to
you hear
keep
that
a
background noise?
Yeah, I can hear a bit of background noise, but it's actually fine. Your voice is higher than that.
Okay. Okay, good.
Yeah,
I'm
we're
sorry, Joel, I missed
never
that
going to
last
get
question.
top. We're never going to get top quality things. I was saying, I think that if Satanism was the dominant religion in America, or at least the kinds that are most common there, then that would actually be quite a good thing because they would be
Yeah,
standing up for secularism and making sure the law separated religion and the government.
yeah. But that people hear the term Satan, they think, 5 point stars and blood rituals here.
Oh no, that's Christianity they're thinking of there.
Very good.
Yeah, that's where you get the blood rituals, the cannibalism.
I'm sorry, I'm competing with she probably thinks I'm allowed to. There's someone right across the way here in the terminal who's I think I'm competing with.
Ah, that's fine. We only get a few opportunities to do these, so it's interesting to just catch up and kind of get to know the different admin guys.
Yeah.
Possibly bring in some of the group members as well later.
Have you had a
It's
chance to talk to Jason yet from a theistic perspective?
not yet, no. I know Jason is still recovering, and he's still, on pain medication and so on. So I
Hmm.
didn't really want to have a recording of anything he might regret later. And
Yeah.
fair enough. He's
Right.
busy.
He's not responsible for his actions.
Yeah, well, I don't know how strong the medication is, but fair enough. Wait till he's at his best, I think.
Good idea.
I'd love to get Jessica on as well. Her brain is astonishing.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yep. That's gonna be a good one. So again, I feel like I'm bringing a pea shooter to a gunfight here. I just don't have a lot of you know. Um, I have some knowledge. I would say just the basic Dawkins and Hitchens and my own intuition, but I don't have the depth and breadth of knowledge that you guys have in terms of reading about Carrier and some of um, you know the Christian theologians.
Well, I've only had a couple of years of catching up on this because before that I only read apologists like Philip Yancey, C.S. Lewis, and Max Lucado, and guys like that. I think reading Adrian Plass was a little bit of a middle ground because he's quite an atheistic Christian.
Hmm.
He doesn't take religion very seriously, which is actually it's a pretty good middle ground on your way out of religion.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me. I don't think theists quite agree with you when I say that Christians are Muhammad atheists and Muslims are Jesus atheists. That we're all atheists to somebody else. I don't think they're ready to agree to that construct, but I think we are actually.
Yeah, it's something I don't know who came up with that one first. I've heard Dawkins say it. I've heard Ricky Gervais say it. It's a fairly, uh, it's a pretty good way of explaining how atheism feels. It's like instead of the nihilist thing that people often tend to associate with it, or religious people are told that's what atheism is. It's actually just getting on with your life without the burden of extra beliefs. It's like
Yeah.
people imagining not believing in leprechauns.
How do you mind asking how are you raising your children? I know they're quite young, but are you teaching them just to be free thinkers and let them just come upon whatever theological or non-theological worldview that they happen upon?
There was something that I think it was Russell Glasser on the Atheist Experience said that I thought was really good. And he said he played with his kids, real or fake, where you just give them some stuff and go, "Is this real or fake?" So like throw a Batman at them, and can they work out if that is a real person or if it's a fictional character? And you can sort of bandy stuff like that about and encourage them to ask questions.
Yeah,
So I've got one who's not talking yet, so it's a little bit early for anything like that. But my eldest is definitely curious and enjoys discovering things about the universe. We watched Cosmos together, and that always blows me away. And he really enjoyed it as well.
yeah,
Just seeing about the universe, and I think just opening a sense of wonder and not being afraid to ask questions as well. Make sure they can freely question anything.
yeah. Have you ever known anybody? I know this quite brilliant PhD in mathematics, and he's religious. It's like he's logical and empirical, except on Sunday mornings, every other day of the week. And I don't know how people compartmentalize that. It's like, okay, um, everything needs to be rooted in logic and scientific method, except between the hours of 8 and 10 in the morning on Sunday morning. Then I'm going to suspend my worldview. It's a very odd thing, but it's not that rare.
Yeah, it's a strange. So, having been there fairly recently, I thought of myself as a really rational person as well when I was religious. It's an odd mixture of the arrogance of thinking that you know the answers in such a way that you don't know all the answers. So, it's a way of saying, I don't know everything, but because I've been raised with this tradition, I believe this tradition understands everything.
So that defined you for a little bit, that you had this logical side, but also a religious side.
I think my entire life I believed I was being logical about it. And any time I had any doubts, of course, I didn't realize that I was suffering from confirmation bias. So what I would do is, if I had something I couldn't explain, I would come up with some sort of excuse or find someone who is enough of an apologist that they could explain it to me in such a way that I could take it in. Stamp down on the cognitive dissonance a bit by thinking I'd found a good answer. But inevitably, that comes back to haunt you, and you end up with more questions again, going, "Wait, that didn't really answer that question." But you can keep it down indefinitely. I mean, there are plenty of really intelligent people who've gone to their graves still religious.
Yeah, that Pew Research still I find interesting. That 50% of scientists are at least deists, and that really hasn't changed. I thought it might change with all the discoveries from what maybe the first one was 1980s or 1990s, and the last Pew was it 2011 perhaps, but it's still about 50% of scientists are deists. There's another study. Um, it's sort of the creme de la creme of the Academy of Sciences. It's much higher than 50%. But I think the
93%,
Pew,
I think. It tends to be if you focus on the areas where the gods of the gaps hide the most. So cosmogony and biology in particular, they're the two areas, the origin of the universe and the origin of life, where they like to conceal gods the most. People who really understand those areas are much more likely to be atheists.
hmm, how do you explain the high amount of PhDs that remain deists?
What, the remain deist? I think it's in America. It may well just be the fact that atheists are some of the most hated, uh, maligned groups because there's a lot of misconception about what atheism is. As far as I recall, there was a study by Pew Research that said that atheists are about as trusted as rapists.
Yeah, it's a deal breaker in this country. You can be anything. You can be a three times adulterer and bankrupt casinos, for example. I know that sounds hypothetical, um, but you know, just don't be an atheist.
Yeah, was it Julia Sweeney? She
Yeah,
said when her mother found out, I can understand not believing in God, but an atheist.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart. There was another study that said that African Americans down south, living down south, it's harder to come out as atheists than it is gay.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. I think it's just down to misconceptions. If you vilify a group, then it's much harder for anyone to join that group.
Yeah. Well, you're in jolly old England, where each generation makes a quantum leap to agnosticism. I remember visiting Edinburgh during Easter weekends, and there was barely anybody in the Church of England. Um, during the holiest day of the year, I mean, it was virtually empty.
Yeah,
I'm not sure
I
if that's
think
true in
it's
London
tipped the
too.
balance. It's more than 50% now non-religious,
Yeah,
and there's probably quite a lot of people in there who are culturally religious, so they don't actually believe; they just identify as religious.
Yeah. Do you think could a British politician come out as atheist? I mean, openly declare it and still have a political career?
I do recall that there was a politician who got a lot of flack for being a Christian, actually.
No. I would expect nothing less from a country that gave us Life of Brian.
The Pythons. In fact, Terry Pratchett's books, having gone back through them, now reading them as an atheist, whereas I originally read them as a Christian, I've discovered quite a lot of little hints in there. Um, and I think reading them did open up my worldview quite a lot. I've just been reading Good Omens again, and that has a lot of poking fun at Christianity in particular, and just making fun of the concepts of demons and angels and the idea
Yeah.
of Armageddon. It has a very
Yeah.
humanistic message to it, specifically at the end.
I guess I was only half kidding when I talked about Mad Magazine being influential in my life too, about skepticism. And did you read Mad as a kid?
I vaguely remember picking up a few Mad copies for a while.
Yeah. I mean, no one. It's sort of like a G-rated Charlie Hebdo, but nobody was off limits. So um, when you have that sort of orientation where members of authority can be, oh, I'm sorry, members of authority can, um, you can just put it easier for you there. Members of authority can be mocked. Then it's not a stretch.
Yeah, the ability to question is really important. I still think that the most important aspect of being able to be non-religious is curiosity. You have to be able to question what you're told.
Absolutely.
So, do you have you looked much into the history of Christianity? Because that's one area that I've really enjoyed studying. For the last
Yeah.
couple of years, I've been reading a lot about evolutionary biology to try and get my mind around that. Lots of philosophy and going into the history, specifically the history of Christianity and just Greco-Roman history in general. It's
Yeah.
always a fascinating subject.
Just bits and pieces. I find this whole idea of did Jesus even exist kind of mind blowing. Because I never even thought about it as a concept. It's like, you know, question question Jesus' divinity, but his actual existence. Until I started joining these debate groups, I didn't even think about that as a possibility.
It's one that was quite surprising to discover. Actually, it took me a while to get the idea around.
But if the more I read about it, it's like it's a very good question. There's very little evidence to say definitively that he did exist, that it wasn't some type of composite.
Yeah, well, obviously the composite itself being the mythical Jesus in the end.
Yeah,
Think it's difficult. I don't think we're ever going to be able to tell. The evidence is just so bad that if there ever was a Jesus, there isn't one anymore. And
yeah. Well,
yeah,
that would be
it's
the
really
end of.
interesting to think about the way it started, and in particular, people don't think of the apostles the way the apostles actually were. People often think of the apostles as being the disciples, but older. But of course, they're completely different people because the disciples themselves never existed.
Yeah. Well, it's like disproving a negative. You can't really say he never existed because that would be very difficult to do. But if that would be the end of two of the three Abrahamic religions, right there. If that were the case.
Oh, they'll find a way. Well, the thing is, so we may never know just because it's impossible to tell one way or the other, but just because the evidence is that compromised by now. But if, say, Christianity discovered for absolute proof that there was no real Jesus, they would still carry on because what would happen is, um, so Christianity would go back to the original Christianity. It would go back to the sacrifice of Jesus occurring in the celestial realm. So really, what would happen is they just go back to basics. They'd be closer to the original Christians than ever before.
Yeah. What I find really interesting about these religious debates is maybe 1 out of 1,000 people will be convinced otherwise of their held beliefs. I mean, just confirmation bias and whatnot. is really what we're talking here is not religion, but the meaning of life and the cosmos and why we're here. Ultimately, that's, in my mind, what we're all talking about.
Yeah, meanings of life. I mean, I think Aaron Ra said it pretty well that if you want your life to have meaning, make someone else's life meaningful.
Yeah,
It's one where everybody finds their own meaning, and I don't think assigning a single meaning to everyone would be that would be quite an arrogant thing to do because really everybody is their own personality and they have their own meaning that they find in life. And there are people who find their meaning in long-term goals and setting things like, the ability to colonize Mars. That's something that people have poured a lot of effort into. They may never see the results, but I think the long-term visions like that are the best ones.
yeah, I would agree. I've learned so much being part of these groups. Just I'm humbled by how much, and not just the agnostics, the atheists, but even the theologians, how much they know, um, and how little I know.
I'm trying to get contact with Jason as well. He's struggling to be able to talk and listen at the same time.
Oh,
And
is
for
he?
some reason, he's trying to join, but he can't get in without broadcasting on his microphone and video as well. And through his phone, it means he can't listen to the conversation and also ask questions because of the way the chat
Oh,
stuff works.
I hope he can
Um,
join us.
yeah, it might not work this time.
If I ring off, um, might it be easier for you to engage him?
I think he doesn't want to transmit voice and video at the moment, so I think he just wants to be here, like in the chat, so he can watch and ask questions at the same time. Um, but don't worry about it. I'm sure
I
we'll get
see.
it working eventually.
Okay.
Get
Is
it
that
in
why you
there.
keep blipping out?
I'm just switching off my mic occasionally so that I don't cough into it usually.
Okay. Well, hello, Jason, if you can hear me.
Yeah, that's hard to tell. So there is another thing I wanted to ask you about. How did you get into Speaker's Corner, and have you only learned so much about Islam just by talking to the guys there?
Yeah. Well, I'm an erstwhile member of Speaker's Corner. I was
Yeah,
invited
I've
by
been banned a
I
few
was in,
times.
yeah. Um, I didn't pass the audition lately, but I joined. I was actually a mutual a Muslim friend of mine asked me to join. This is one that had 100 members. Now it has 3,000. There was just a bunch of people, atheists, Christians, Muslims, just just kind of having cool chats, and then it's just changed completely in my mind to a propaganda machine.
Yeah, it's gone a bit of an echo chamber and Speaker's
Yeah,
Corner anyway.
it definitely has been. But when I joined, it was just no more than 200 people actually. Um, I guess being a founder member didn't protect me from getting the boot.
Yeah, eventually. If you ask too many questions, they gang up on you.
Well,
That's actually
I exhibit. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
that's a trend in theist groups. Any theist group which has the majority the same or similar sects, if you ask questions too much, they'll actually kick you for that. Um, it seems to be very strange. Like questioning faith tends to be a bootable offense.
Yeah. Well, it's so transparent. I think you and I were part of that creationist, intelligent design website. I can't remember
Ah,
the
yes, I
name of it, but
remember.
it
I
was
got kicked out of
basically
that.
yeah. Well, it's it was basically a euphemism for creationism.
Yeah, and in fact, as Aaron Ra pointed out, that's actually what they did. They took a creationist textbook and just did a find and replace with intelligent design,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
was demonstrated in a court of law as well. So they don't really
Yeah.
have any way to come back from that.
Did you ever see the Nova series on Dover versus the Board of Education? That was that famous case in Pennsylvania where they tried to introduce creationistic textbooks. But I'll send you the link. It's a fascinating watch, and they found actually the missing link when they found the traces of the copy and paste, changing creationism to intelligent design. So it's a great watch. I'll send it to you. I'd really recommend it.
Yeah, sure. I may have watched it before. I mean, I've seen so many of these things now, but I'd definitely be interested in that.
That's Mark. You know Mark Siegel. He's a member of our group.
Ah, okay, yeah.
That's Mark's hometown.
I feel sorry for him now.
Yeah, well, he's got a lot of skin in the game to combat that.
Yeah, it does occur to me that I don't actually live that far from Oxford. Maybe I'll get to see Dawkins once.
Oh, you should definitely. Just as a side, I went to Oxford when I was in college. That was my study year abroad. I went to St. Cat's.
Ah, cool. When I was abroad, it was in Africa.
We're always going somewhere else.
Yeah, I never went to college, so I'm a self-educated Luddite.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, I'm just one of the ignoramuses who never went through any proper education.
Sometimes we can be too educated.
Yeah, there is a way of going very far down one route. I wouldn't say too far because obviously it really benefits us having experts in a particular field. But I do
Yeah.
enjoy the idea of having multiple disciplines, multiple interests, because that's where you find the interesting edges where things meet. In particular, in work, I like having a job where I mix different types of discipline together.
Sounds like it's getting quite spotty now.
What's that?
Sounds like it's getting quite choppy.
The video feed from my end is working quite well. I've still
Oh,
got all
good,
of your audio and your video. I mean, I occasionally get a little flicker back and forth, but it's actually working all right.
good. Well, I apologize for my appearance. I basically spent the night at the airport, and not great for hygiene. So
Ah,
I'm glad you're not
yeah.
picking up anything else besides my ghastly appearance.
I've spent a long time in airports as well. Used to fly around a lot.
Mm, no fun. It's not as glamorous as people think.
Yeah, I remember once I had to spend 9 hours of delay in an airport where there were no seats, so I had to sit on a guitar case.
No goodness. So you play the guitar too?
I used to. I don't really play it anymore because I played it specifically for church, and it was something that I did. I refused to learn any music other than Christian music because to me that was the only purpose of music was to glorify God. Kind of gives you an idea of what kind of Christian I was. I was a bit of an asshole.
Well, I took up guitar just to play my kids to sleep, so I know a few chords, and I think Ken plays actually too.
Yeah,
So
it's a very
we'll have to
popular
have an
instrument.
administrative band.
It's been a long time since I played anything. I decided to take aside the time that I used to use to practice guitar and instead learn philosophy.
Yeah, time is a premium. So
Yeah, I do feel sometimes that I've wasted 30 years, but I do know that I've gotten a lot of good things out of it, a lot of good experiences, and obviously a family and everything. But I
yeah,
do feel like maybe I would have gone into further education if I hadn't been a Christian.
yeah. Well, it's never too late.
Yeah, well, it's always tough when you've got family to look after and bills to pay. It'd be nice to do some proper education as well. You never know. It might be one of those ones where when the kids move out, maybe I'll have an opportunity.
Yeah. Well, my kids have moved out, and it opens up a whole new world. It's my wife hasn't. Do you have this expression, empty nest syndrome in England?
Yeah, I think I've heard that.
Um, my wife is mourning the kids getting older and moving out. To me, it's the best thing ever. I love it. My son's in California. My daughter's a senior in college, and I've enjoyed every moment of it.
Yeah, yeah, it's going to be interesting when they get smarter than me.
I doubt that. But well, Joe, this is a pretty good experience. Maybe we'll call it a wrap fairly soon.
Yeah, sure, we can leave it there if you want. I just wanted to make sure we get a few videos up, get some feel for how this camera sounds. I'll be interested to listen to this back and see if my microphone problem's been fixed, because otherwise it's going to be a very one-sided conversation again.
Well, happy to be part of things. It was good to meet you in person. Um, and thanks for putting all this together.
All right, I'll try stop broadcasting live. Last time I hit stop broadcast, it actually cut the feed before I hit stop, which is a bit odd. So let's see if it does it now. I'll try stopping the feed now.